to the third of the three options, which is really go big, go all in. And here, the core purpose would be to force the strait back open coercively or militarily, and potentially to seize Iran's capacity to export energy by taking Karg Island. And we've talked about that potential scenario in previous episodes. 90% right now of Iran's oil exports go through the export terminal at Karg Island, this island, some number of miles off the coast of Iran in the Gulf. And the idea would be for the United States actually to put boots on the ground to take that and try to hold it against Iran, which would obviously attack it to try to dislodge us, or at least to cause great harm, and thereby essentially to take command of Iran's capacity to export energy through the Gulf. In addition, it could also mean something Halima referenced when we were talking about trying to force open the Strait of Hormuz, the need for boots on the ground along the strait itself to try to ensure that there can be safe passage through that strait without relying on Iran's good graces for it. Now, one big challenge with making an objective of this campaign, getting the strait back open, is the reason it closed in the first place was you started the war. So a thing that was not closed before you started the war, opening it now becomes your core objective. That almost feels like a self-licking ice cream cone of military logic. I think very dangerous for us to go down the road that we now must physically open the strait through some combination of naval and land operations around the strait. And then the idea of going and taking Karg Island, I think, may be somewhat appealing to a president who always likes seizing the oil of other countries or controlling the oil of other countries, as he's talked about repeatedly in Iraq and Syria, and as he's just done in Venezuela. But of course, trying to sit on Karg Island with US men and women in uniform, subject to attacks being lobbed across the water from mainland Iran indefinitely, that to me feels like a recipe for a certain kind of quagmire that is very dangerous. And then, of course, as you try to force the strait open, Iran is going to use every countermeasure in its arsenal to try to keep it closed, but also to inflict as much pain as possible. That could mean, again, more loss of American life. It could also mean attacks on Gulf countries that expand beyond just energy infrastructure to include things like desalination plants or other critical infrastructure that sustains the economy and, frankly, human life in those countries. So the go big option has a certain kind of appeal in that you'd be saying, we're going to finish this thing once and for all. We are going to fully defeat Iran. But that appeal starts to fade pretty rapidly when you think about both what it will take in terms of the resources and what it will mean in terms of the risks. But that option is something that certainly the Pentagon is putting in front of the president. They are probably not advocating for it, I'll bet, but they're putting in front of the president, this is what it would mean, Mr. President, operationally, to physically try to do this, both on the island and in the strait, in addition to all the other steps that we've already described that could include an Esfahan operation as well within this option. So that's available to the president, comes with a massive amount of, I think the technical term is hair on it, but one that would have to go in the options memo for his consideration.
So two quick things on this, and agree with how you laid it out. One is we have not yet seen the full measure of Iranian naval capabilities to counter an attempt to force open the Strait of Hormuz. For example, one of the things that we've been most worried about, the United States has been most worried about, is a more extensive mining campaign in the strait, which would be extremely time-consuming, dangerous, challenging to deal with. The Iranians had sort of flirted around the edges with mining, but have not yet gone all in on mining, in part, I think, to avoid having to cut off their own exports through the strait. But if full weight of the United States Navy is going to go barreling into the strait, I suspect we should be prepared to deal with sea mines in that situation. The second is that Iran sort of famously uses these small, fast, highly maneuverable boats to kind of menace U.S. naval ships in the strait. Even during peacetime, they'll sort of drive up to the edge of much larger, much more capable U.S. naval vessels. And the risk there is you pack these things with explosives, go ramming into the side of a ship, and you can do a lot of damage to it, maybe even sink it if you're not worried at all about the crew of your little vessel being killed in the process, which they probably wouldn't in this circumstance. So there are other Iranian capabilities that have not yet been brought to bear fully in this context, but they could be in the context of a bigger naval assault. But the second thing, to where you ended, I do think the administration is signaling a very real willingness to consider this option. They are deploying a Marine Expeditionary Unit to the region, about 2,500 Marines on a flat top ship, whose core mission normally is some sort of amphibious landing of some kind. That's what they're trained for, and they will be in theater somewhere somewhere over a week from now. I think is about the timeline. And there is talk of other U.S. military units, the 82nd Airborne and others, being put on a kind of higher level of alert status and readiness. And that could either be signaling to Iran, in the sort of escalate to de-escalate category, that we are ready to go further, or it could be genuine preparation to do what you just laid out. But they are buying the president this option through some of the preparations that they're making. And rhetorically, the president himself has not taken boots on the ground off the table. In fact, he said something to the effect of, he used a golf term. I don't have the yips, I think he said, about boots on the ground at one point, basically indicating that he would look at it. So I think this is a real option, even for all the hair on it that you described.
By the way, the whole mine threat, which is real, and we've seen that spike a bit over the last several days, would probably be better dealt with if we had not decommissioned U.S. mine layers just a little bit before this conflict broke out. It's just another indicator of how we didn't exactly plan for all of the various scenarios we might be confronting as we got into this whole thing. We've laid out those three scenarios. As John said at the outset, we have been very clear that we thought this war was a bad idea from the start, and we think it should end as soon as possible for the American national interest and for the sake of the world. But we wanted to go through this exercise to lay out how this is going to be discussed, framed, potentially presented in the White House, in the Situation Room, in the Oval Office. And we'll have to watch both the moves and the statements the administration makes to see which line they're likely going down among these three flavors of options. And obviously there's a spectrum among them as well. So that's what we will be looking for over the course of the coming days. And in the meantime, we will just have to see what everyone else, what every other actor, starting with Iran, but also the countries in the Gulf and beyond, will do to react to the fast-moving developments here.
And by the way, if you're left thinking, that was pretty unsatisfying, it doesn't feel like there's a good, clean,
right,
comfortable option here.
Where's the good option?
Welcome to policymaking. Unfortunately, this is often how it goes, and why it's such a hard job to be the president of the United States, because you have people like us walking in and say, here are three things that you could do, and here
they all have big
innumerable problems with every one of them. Which do you choose? That is what decision making is like at this level, for better or for worse.